Shabbat Shalom everyone and welcome to Science Lab. The signs are happening because Lord Jesus Christ is coming.
Every day we are looking at some of the signs that are happening around us. Even today we are going to look at some of the end time signs happening in Israel.
On April 29, 2019, the Jewish nation of Israel celebrated their 72nd Independence Day. In this episode, we are going to look back at the history of Israel.
David Ben-Gurion declared the independent state of Israel on May 14, 1948, and a new chapter of Jewish history began.
Arabs and Jews both trace their ancestry back to Abraham. Centuries ago, God promised Abraham that powerful nations would come from his descendants, but those promises were conditional upon his obedience to God and his laws. God tested Abraham by closing the womb of Sarah, his wife. She could not have children, which made the promise of his seed becoming a great nation seems ridiculous. At first, Abraham waited patiently, knowing that the same God who created the universe would also open his wife's womb. Sarah was a bit more impatient. She begged Abraham to lay with her handmaid Hagar so he might have a son. His faith weakening, Abraham agreed, and Hagar did have a son named Ishmael. Sarah became jealous of Hagar and eventually caused her to run away. As Hagar fled, Abraham prayed that God would bless Ishmael. Abraham committed his life to God in total submission and obedience. God eventually opened the womb of Sarah and fulfilled the awesome national promises through their son Isaac. Through Isaac, the nation of Israel was born.
But what about Ishmael? Where does he fit in? Though cut off from the God and not included in the great national promises God made to Abraham, Ishmael's descendant also became a great people. God answered Abraham's prayer for Ishmael. Ishmael's progeny developed into many nations of Arabic people in the world today.
Ishmael and Isaac both became great nations. To Isaac and his progeny, God gave the promised land, modern-day Israel. It's interesting to note that even the Arabs, through mostly Muslims, revere Abraham as a prophet of God. But that is where the similarities end between Jews and Arabs. Through the centuries, as both families grew, they spread to other continents. In 70 AD, the Jews revolted against the ruling Roman Empire. Jerusalem was destroyed by Titus, and thus began the dispersion of Jews over the continents of the world. With the Jews scattered throughout much of Europe, the vacuum created in Palestine was filled by Christianity and Islam, both fighting for preeminence. The 10th and the 11th centuries hosted the Crusades between the Christians and Muslims. Hatred, warfare, and violence best describe this troubled region of the earth throughout the history of man. Jerusalem is critical to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All three religions have influenced and driven their believers to fight for and conquer Palestine.
Late in the 19th century, Russian Jews journeyed to Palestine, then under Turkish rule, to purchase and settle small plots in the Holy Land, primarily agricultural settlements.
Between 1894 and 1897, a man named Theodor Herzl began a movement to gain Palestine as a permanent home for the Jewish people. Under Herzl, the first Zionist conference was held in Basel in 1897 and defined as its object the securing for the Jewish people of home in Palestine, guided by public law. Here we find the beginnings of a peaceful, non-violent action to claim the promised land as a permanent home for the Jews. The British government was moved by Herzl's work to propose a land agreement for the part of the Sinai. Others in the government, such as Joseph Chamberlain, the colonial secretary, suggested other tracts of land in Africa to be the home for the Jews. But Herzl knew he could never motivate the national enthusiasm in an area outside Palestine, the Holy Land, and declined the offer. Shortly thereafter, Mr. Herzl died, but the Zionist movement became increasingly popular and powerful. The Jewish National Fund began to accumulate money to be used for the purchase of the land in Palestine. Over the next few decades, Jewish agricultural settlements formed throughout the region. In 1909, the first kibbutz was established in Degania. The town of Tel Aviv sprouted up in close proximity to Jaffa, and by 1914, the Jews once again began to influence Jerusalem by their presence.
With increasing control in Palestine, the Zionist movement, now under the leadership of Chaim Weizmann, whose successor, sought international recognition as a state within the borders of Palestine. To accomplish this objective, Weizmann began negotiations with Sir Edward Grey, the British Foreign Secretary.
In 1916, both Weizmann and Grey worked together an official declaration making Palestine the Jewish state. The British government promoted the implementation of the Sykes-Picot Agreement during the same month. In the Sykes-Picot arrangement, the British were trying to divide the land between the Jews and Arabs, retain territorial control over Haifa, and resolve the conflict with the French over leadership in the Near East. The most difficult question was how to divide Palestine in a manner which fulfilled the conditions set forth in the negotiations with the Jews and Arabs.
At this crucial time, the British drafted the Balfour Declaration. This official declaration, starting the British Empire's support of the Zionist movement, came at a time when British forces were engaged with Turkish forces for control over Palestine.
This declaration failed to gain the support necessary to really bring about change. After the First World War, the British worked to implement the conditions of Balfour. By 1920, the British were awarded the Palestine Mandate, rulership over the region of Palestine. This wasn't initially satisfactory to the Jews because they were not permitted to govern themselves. For the next decade, as Jewish migration to Palestine increased, the Arabs countered with a movement towards unity, led by the Haj Amin al-Husseini, Muslim high priest of Jerusalem. Haj Amin al-Husseini began a terrorist campaign aimed at overthrowing both the Jews and British. Support from Arabic terrorism came from Syrian and Iraqi mercenaries, as well as from Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. Though this terrorist campaign had many supporters, in 1937 it fell. This defeat caused al-Husseini to lose his status as president of the Supreme Muslim Council. Within weeks, he was forced to flee to Beirut and eventually to Egypt. Thus, the violent attempts of the Arabs to regain control of Palestine failed miserably.
So far, we were seeing about the signs happening in Israel. After seeing all these things, we definitely need a break. Don't go anywhere, we'll meet you after a short break. Welcome back to Science Lab. The signs are happening because Lord Jesus Christ is coming. Before the break, we were saying about the signs happening in Israel, and let's continue. In 1924, the United States introduced laws which drastically squeezed down the flow of immigration. This closed a door for Jewish immigration to the United States and brought the Jewish plight to the world's attention once again. They needed a land for their own people.
As the years passed, the British became increasingly aware that they would not be able to govern Palestine in a manner which satisfied both Arabs and Jews. Appeasing the Arabs was necessary to ensure unrestricted passage through the Suez Canal and harmony with the Arabs serving in the empire's military forces. They realized if immigration remained steady, the Jews with strong financial backing from the United States and European countries would eventually become the majority population in Palestine. The Arabs were also keenly aware of the increasing proportion of Jews in Palestine. They were concerned about growing Jewish influence, politically and financially. In another effort to alter the situation, more Arab rebellion against the British boiled the surface. This new wave of violence resulted in the Palestine White Paper of May 1939. The situation was further complicated by Hitler and the Jews fleeing from the concentration camps. The Palestine White Paper prevented Jews from settling in Palestine because the quota had already been filled. Ironically, the British were later to become dependent on the Jews in Palestine for strategic military purposes. With the end of the war in 1945, the British attitude towards Palestine changed. The Egyptians demanded the evacuation of British forces without conditions from their country and rejected an agreement made with Ernest Bevin, the British Foreign Secretary, for conditional withdrawal in 1949. Finally, after continued terror against British, the Palestine issue was presented to the United Nations on February the 25th, 1947. A special committee on Palestine was formed on May 15, 1947, which instantly recommended the termination of the British mandate. They further proposed a division of Palestine into an Arab state and Jewish state, with an international regime over Jerusalem. In November of that same year, the UN approved the proposal.
The British agreed to the declaration and committed to a withdrawal by May 1948. The Jews immediately accepted the outline for the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine, but the Arabs protested violently to the notion of giving the Jews land.
Palestine was to go through the plains of transformation once again. Not since the early 20th century had this region been traumatized by changing administration. It was at the time that the British forces under the command of General Allenby gained Palestine through victorious campaigns against the Turks. Throughout the early months of 1948, tension and violence between Arabs and Jews escalated. As British forces withdrew from towns, the Jews and Arabs engaged in fighting to control the abandoned area. Palestinian Arabs received substantial support from the Syrians, Iraqis, and Egyptians. Their goal was to push the Jews into the sea. And the Jews gained the upper hand in April and May as they gained control over Tiberias, Haifa, Acre, Safed, and Jaffa. Loss of these towns infuriated the Arabs, who then reverted to terrorism. After several bloody terrorist exchanges by both Arab and Jew, a massive Arab exodus was underway. Of the estimated 700,000 Arabs in Palestine at the time, approximately 530,000 fled the region.
On May 14, 1948, Israel became the Jewish state. The Zionist movement released their victory, but their celebration was cut short when the Arab military force from 6 nations invaded the very next day.
The Jews cautiously retreated as they tried to repulse the invasion. 10 days after their new state was invaded, the Jews launched a counterattack. Their tenacious fighting spirit led to miraculous victories. Shortly after the initial Arab invasion, the Israelis regained the control of the road to Jerusalem and conquered the Arab forces in the coastal plain, Upper Galilee, and Negev. The war for the independence exerted a heavy toll on this fledgling nation. With only 650,000 citizens in their nation, more than 4,000 soldiers and 2,000 citizens gave their lives in the struggle for Palestine. Yet their valiant effort led to a United Nations brokered armistice revolution, which officially ended the war on November the 18th, 1948. The United States became the first nation to recognize Israel as state, just an hour after its designation as such by the United Nations on May the 14th, 1948. Other nations soon recognized Israel, including Russia, South Africa, and Canada. 10 months after the United States recognized Israel, the British government also consented. After Britain, other European nations and Latin America followed the suit.
Israel has completed 72 years after getting its independence. Israel is the timepiece we should watch out for in these last days. By looking at it, we will know at what time we are in.
Before we end the show, we would like to ask you a question. Who controlled Palestine before the independence of Israel? Option A, Ottoman Empire. Option B, Saudi Arabia. And option C, Great Britain.
Send us the right answers to sciencelab@angeltv.org. If you have missed any of the episodes, don't worry, you can watch it again in our Science Lab YouTube page. But don't forget to like, share and comment on the video.
And also ask your friends and relatives to watch the Science Lab so that they will know that we are living in the last days. Remember, signs are happening because Lord Jesus Christ is coming. Maranatha.